Welcome back, scholars, to our Digital Academy. I am Professor Spark. Whether we are turning the pages of a timeless novel, our mission remains the same. Will today's sweep us into the concert hall? Let's find out together.
Welcome to This Explainer. Okay, today we are going to completely reframe the legacy of two guys you've definitely heard of, Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm. For generations, we've kind of just pictured them as these harmless children's authors. But the actual truth? Well, it's so much more fascinating. They were actually vital cultural preservationists, and they compiled some of the absolute darkest, most psychologically complex stories ever recorded. Think fairy tales are just for kids? Let's dive right in by challenging basically everything you thought you knew about those bedtime stories you grew up with. We all know the drill, right? A gentle, magical creature, a singing princess, the classic happily ever after. But if you honestly think these tales were originally designed just to rock toddlers to sleep with sweet dreams, man, you are in for a massive surprise.
Seriously, when we look at the highly sanitized, super magical adaptations we get today and contrast them with the original 1812 publication, which was aptly named Children's and Household Tales, the sheer darkness and moral rigidity of the source material is startling, like literally shocking. These original tales were frequently violent, incredibly morally complex, and they were absolutely intended for adults just as much for children. They totally refused to shy away from the harsh realities of the world. Actually, they highlighted them.
Moving into our first section, preserving the oral tradition.
So to understand why these stories are so unexpectedly dark, we've got to look at what the brothers were actually trying to achieve in the first place. First published in 1812, their collection ultimately grew to over 200 stories. But here's the crazy part. The secret is, the brothers didn't invent these tales, not a single one. Instead, they were literally racing against time to preserve a vanishing linguistic treasure. You see, as industrialization swept across Europe, the old oral tradition of storytelling was deeply, deeply threatened. The Grimms essentially stepped in to archive these German and European folktales, preserving the whole shebang as a cornerstone of cultural identity before it could be erased forever.
And this urgency to preserve their culture perfectly illustrates how their most famous stories share this distinct underlying framework. Whether we're talking about Cinderella fighting for justice against a totally cruel stepfamily, Snow White battling a jealous queen, Hansel and Gretel surviving a witch through pure intelligence, or Rapunzel finding freedom from an enchantress, you really start to see a clear pattern emerge. It's all about innocent heroes facing down terrifying hardships and supernatural evil. The stories don't share a continuous plot, but every single one presents a unique moral, psychological, or spiritual journey.
All right, part 2. Into the symbolic forest. Right at the thematic heart of almost every major Grimm story is a place you'll instantly recognize: the woods. But the forest isn't just a location on a map, It's a profound psychological concept. In the Grimm universe, forests represent the unknown, intense fear, and deep temptation. It's essentially a place of spiritual testing. Characters almost always wander into the forest as vulnerable innocents, and if they manage to survive, they have to leave wiser and stronger. The forest is literally where the transformation happens.
This progression through the woods mirrors the classic coming-of-age journey, basically forcing completely powerless protagonists to grow up. Step 1 is always the separation from the safety of home. Step 2 brings the trials and temptations, the wolves, the witches, the creeping darkness. Then step 3 is that crucial discovery of inner strength, whether that means perseverance, compassion, or unwavering moral integrity. And finally, step 4 is the return home, fully transformed. I mean, it is, quite simply, a masterclass in psychological growth.
But how exactly is all this growth measured? Well, in the Grimm tales, the moral universe is razor sharp. Unlike modern stories where we might kind of love a morally gray anti-hero or a misunderstood villain, ambiguity is incredibly rare here. Good characters are defined entirely by kindness, honesty, and humility. Evil is driven purely by greed, envy, and vanity. And the magic in these stories, it rarely exists just for the spectacle. It acts as a divine force to reward that virtue and, let me tell you, heavily and decisively punish those sharply defined evil traits.
Which brings us to part 3, psychology, violence, and justice.
So the methods used to test these heroes were way more intense than anything you'd ever see in a modern cartoon. But why? Well, the famous psychologist Bruno Bettelheim argued that these intense symbols exist specifically to help kids confront their deepest emotional fears in a manageable, symbolic form. The wolf represents real predatory danger. The witch embodies threatening, unchecked authority. The magical helpers provide that necessary hope. And the eventual happy ending? That serves as a crucial emotional resolution after confronting the terror. It's basically an ancient form of exposure therapy.
Now, beyond the forest, these intense psychological themes play out right inside the home, too. The families in Grimm tales are often sources of both deep love and terrible, terrible conflict. We see absent fathers, cruel stepmothers, and abandoned children. And this actually reflects the harsh historical realities of the time: extreme poverty, famine, remarriage, and skyrocketing mortality rates in earlier centuries. But within these struggles, we see some fascinating female dynamics. While some modern readers criticize early heroines as being passive, the text actually highlights incredibly powerful antagonists and highly resilient saviors. Take Gretel, for example. She has to rely completely on her own intelligence and courage to outwit the witch and save her brother.
And when those heroines and heroes finally do triumph, the justice served is absolute. In older folk traditions, justice wasn't psychologically nuanced, and it certainly wasn't focused on rehabilitation. It was immediate, shockingly violent, and designed to be an unforgettable moral instruction. We are talking about punishments like the evil queen in Snow White being forced to dance in red-hot iron shoes until she literally drops dead. It was a harsh world out there, and the stories made absolutely sure the consequences for evil were permanently etched into the minds of anyone listening.
Moving on to Part 4, an enduring cultural legacy.
Emerging from the dark forest of these intense themes, the legacy of the Brothers Grimm is just absolutely staggering. They didn't just write a book, right? They shaped literature, education, and psychology. They preserved an invaluable record of European folklore that might have otherwise been completely lost to history. Their work proved that traditional oral narratives were significant literary heritage. By blending deeply rooted folklore with these timeless moral questions, they created an archive that fundamentally shaped global storytelling, exploring universal human experiences like fear, courage, love, and transformation.
As we wrap up this explainer, I really want you to think about the journey we just mapped out. The woods, the trials, the discovery of inner strength. Ask yourself, which Grimm archetype are you currently facing in your own symbolic forest? How might these ancient, unvarnished symbols of fear and resilience still be mirroring your own journey today? Thanks so much for exploring the Grimm reality with me, and definitely keep questioning the stories you think you know.